Hi there. Welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes a single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, I interviewed Klein from JR Global Associates. JR is a thought leader, he's a speaker, he's a consultant, and he's the author of several books. But two books specifically that applies to current disruption is a global business in the age of destructions and distractions, and also the second one, global business in an age of transformation. We talk about several different important topics. How they impact on destruction impacts international market, foreign policy of nations currently, how they impact that the global businesses, also the impact of current COVID on international market. But I think you're really gonna enjoy my discussion with them when he specifically talk about luxury of time. Currently, what we've gone through for the last couple of years, business leader used to have a lot of time on their hand to make a decision whether we need to share research, or we gotta look at industry data, or could be simply looking at other company, how they make a decision and then make a decision. But that luxury is just probably not no longer there. As he walks us through that, that the impromptu decision-making skill sets were a lot more important for the last couple of years that they used to be. So the time, an equation to make a decision may not be there anymore. If you like this content, enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. Don't forget to send us your feedback. Until next time, enjoy. Hi guys, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today my guest is someone very special, JR. JR, that the topic we are looking, so much change over the last couple of years in terms of business, in terms of leadership, and you have so many years of experience in this area. So I'm looking forward to learning from you, looking forward to our discussion. Thank you so much for time today.
Gurmeet, it's a pleasure and an honor to be on with you. You have characteristically gotten to the heart of the matter and have provided the kind of insight and impact that today's business world needs.
Yeah, just since so much change, companies change, they have to reinvent the new product, and especially so much pressure on the leaders today to perform, not only take care of the people, but also move the companies forward. Where you see one of the, some of the biggest disruptions over the last couple of years, JR, where you see the biggest changes happen in this area?
Well, I tell you, in my thinking, this is not actually a new phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Change has always affected leadership. All the way back to the point where somebody discovered how to take the edges off of this piece of wood and make a wheel out of it, mm-hmm. or what to do with steam power, or what to do with the beginning of digitization. The difference, I think, in today's environment is that we as leaders don't have the luxury of time that we used to have. I did some research for some of my writing on how long it takes cultures to adapt to change. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably not going to get the exact numbers right, but I'm going to give you kind of the idea of it. There was a time when we changed from horse and carriage to automobiles. It probably took almost an entire century before that change was realized. Mm-hmm. And all of that, our leaders inside of that had the luxury of having time to figure out what to do. Then you get to the point where we began to have changes taking place in the cultures in society. You have the airplane. Airplane actually took about 50 years before it was sort of accepted by the cultures. Mm-hmm. Then you get computers. Computers were probably a little bit faster. That part of the technology was a little bit faster. And I say accepted by a culture that comes at some established point of acceptance of purchase, mm-hmm. economics or whatever. And then it brings us to the present time when the social app TikTok was foisted onto the culture. It took a total of 18 days before it hit that.
Wow.
And so the changes as they come, driven by this tsunami of technology that we all, whether we're leaders or not, official leaders or not, has been just overwhelming all of us. Uh, if I had hair, it would be blown back most of the time because things change so quickly. We don't have the luxury of going through those processes that we used to do, those old models that we used to do. When we used to want to bring a change into our product line or into our firm or the way that we market or whatever, we would go through a process of innovative research. We'd come up with what the product is. You'd find a test group about the product, then you'd find a test market about the product. And then after you went through that 18, 24 months, then when it was ready to go, then you launched that product.
Yeah.
You don't have that luxury anymore. Because if we hang on to that old model, reality will have already passed us by.
Yeah, definitely.
And today, some young man or young woman in India or Africa or Southeast Asia or California takes their cell phone and comes up with this idea of an app, and it can be out in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And then we can have a whole nother discussion about what success means and what that process is actually like. But in reality, one of the big problems today is for leaders is to be able to be flexible enough, to be able to be sensitive enough, to be able to be cognitive enough, to be able to be looking at four directions at the same time. I like to say four dimensions, because it's just not side to side and front to back. It's also time. That's the fourth dimension. You have to be looking all the time, and you have to be making decisions all the time. You have to do that based upon the best information you have. And then the last little piece that I'll say about that is that what we're also finding from research is that one of the big advantages that I'm going to call them new model leaders. I don't want to call them young leaders or old leaders, because there's some of those more mature generations. Some still have been able to grab this and stay relevant. That old model has to always be ready to change and has to not be afraid to fail. Okay. My experience over the years in the corporate culture, boy, one thing you did not want to do is to make a mistake, to fail. Because everything ground to a halt. There had to be an investigation. There had to be nowhere to point the finger. Then there had to be some kind of reparation for that, and you had to then change policies, do whatever to make it work. Today's world is diametrically different than that, and you have to be the really successful leaders that we observe these days are leaders that are not afraid to fail,
make a mistake.
Yeah, right. And the reality is they use failure as a learning tool. And I would like to tell you who this, I don't remember if it's Jeff Bezos or Musk or somebody who has quoted in some public appearance that they had launched a product that failed, and somebody asked him about the failing, and they said, "Wait a minute, I've got thousands of other failures that I'm going to have. This is nothing, you know." And so I think that's one of the big pieces I would I would kind of put it inside of this envelope. Um, Leaders have to be better thinkers.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, those are great point you mentioned, Jer. You know, from the time standpoint, look how time is condensed. You know, so we don't have so much time left to make a decisions, right? Especially take a look at the COVID. You know, we had to make a decision overnight. Some companies have to make it, you know, in a couple of days, couple hours. We have to reinvent the product, reinvent the services in a certain industries. So you don't have a time when the crisis like that happen.
Yep.
You know, and yeah, you're gonna make some mistakes when you're going through it, but can you make enough good decision that you can move the company forward, even though there's some bad ones that you made a mistakes, right? So I don't think you have a choice anymore than not making a mistakes. You know, it's part of that making decision, either good or bad. But what you up against is what you, as you mentioned, is a time. You don't have a time, unlimited time that you can think it through. You can go through a lot of research and go through a lot of debates and stuff before you make a decision. And some of those decisions are on a just a matter of time. You know, so then, you know, before you know, you get a negative impact on a companies, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You've got it. The old idea of being able to not being able isn't the right word. The inability to be able to learn from that mistake and move on. The ramifications of that are you lose your validity. You lose your relevance, and you go away. You know, so there's these blind spots that leaders sometimes develop that are part of sort of that old playbook, you know, that leadership use. You mentioned the pandemic. You know, there's a good example of one of those crises that basically changes. It's a paradigm crisis. One of those places where things change completely. You know, for years, I want to say for years prior to this crisis, we have academics, leaders have been talking about what the changes are in the workforce, what the changes are in the workplace, what the changes are for individuals, what the changes are for leaders, what the changes are for owners, what the changes are for investors. We had all of these things out there that that we wanted to speculate on exactly what's going to happen. And then one morning we woke up and it was here. We no longer had the luxury of debating anymore because the offices closed down. The factory has to shut its doors. You can't fly those planes anymore. There's nobody coming to my restaurant anymore. Then what do you do? That is probably one of the primary questions that I stick inside of this conversation, that sticks in my mind all the time. And that is, what are you prepared to do as a leader? What are you prepared to do? Now, you can see by just a cursory review of what happened to businesses during those 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, that things were just disrupted all over. And what you see is that some people were thinking and some people weren't thinking. Okay. And I'll just take one example. One example is restaurants. Okay. And so restaurants, they didn't have staff. They didn't have customers. They didn't have anything really. And you saw a lot of them that kept taking that old model that didn't work and trying to make it work, trying to figure out how to make it work. But then you saw some of those cognitive leaders, I call them the transformational leaders, who began to think, well, I can't do this. What can I do? They became they became asymmetric rather than symmetric.
Yeah.
Leaders.
Yep.
And so they said, well, I can still get my food made. I can still offer it to clients, but nobody's going to be here. So what are we going to do? Well, they come up with the idea of takeout, but there was nobody there to take it. So they kind of spawned this other little industry of delivery.
Yeah.
And you had restaurants, I'm going to say, I'll broaden it a little bit, businesses
Mhm.
that came through that crisis probably stronger
Yeah.
than they went into it. And I would broaden that a lot, I guess. I have a daughter-in-law
Mhm.
who works for a bank. Okay.
Okay.
And she works with high wealth people, and she's a supervisor in a phone bank where you're calling people and
Mhm.
doing all that stuff. And all of a sudden, one day, she woke up, and you couldn't go where you wanted to go.
Mhm.
But her business was sensitive enough to be able to figure out and understand that the demand did not go away.
Mhm.
Demand was still there. The supply, got to figure that out a little bit. And
Yeah.
so what happened to her is she basically began working from home completely.
Mhm.
And what happened is the bank discovered that they were getting more productivity, more performance out of this workforce for a number of reasons. There's all those auxiliary things that I was in senior management for 50 years, and so
Mhm.
I understand that you have a tendency to get myopic when you get past the 13th floor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they began to think about, there's some lessons to take from this. Well, now here we're done with the pandemic. She's still working at home, but they're beginning to change that. So now they have every Wednesday or one day, you come into the office and spend that day at the office.
Mhm.
And that's that meeting days where you meet with your team, or you meet with your hierarchy, or you take care of those kind of things that you have to take care of in the office. And I am not sure, and I don't think they are sure either, if we'll ever go back to that old model.
Mhm.
Just little tiny little sweeteners inside of that. It's not just the performance,
Yeah.
but it is they pay taxes based upon occupancy of the building. Okay.
Mhm.
And they use utilities based upon what they need to have in the building.
Wow. Mhm.
And so all of those things have been greatly reduced, which then have impacted what the bottom line looks like.
Yeah.
And isn't that the role of all leaders? Is what you're trying to do is get more performance, better performance at manageable costs. That's what
Yeah.
you're trying to do all the time. So I'm not really sure if there ever is going to be, there are going to be remnants of this old model,
Yeah.
but I'm not quite sure if we're ever going to see that completely. Even before the pandemic, we began to see the emergence of the cloud workforce.
Mhm.
And that's even stronger today. That has basically infiltrated even the old model. And I'm going to make a rash statement here. I'll probably get in trouble for this, but you're not going to see a lot of old model companies anymore.
Yeah.
Because they just aren't going to be able to compete.
Yeah.
They're either, you're seeing some pretty dramatic changes in the business world these days based upon the realities of the situation.
Yeah. So does that's a great point here. So if that's the idea that companies have to re-innovate, they have to figure out, does that demand different skill set, different mindset from leaders to going forward with the companies? They gotta have a different personality. They gotta have a different skill set. They can't be, you know, they gotta be level. They gotta be more grounded. What that changing from a leaders, that business expectations are a little bit different from a leaders now than they were before.
You hit a good point, and I think that the answer is interesting. The basic skills of a leader are still there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you still have to have some of those basic skills. You have to understand the business. You have to understand the processes. You have to understand the finances. You have to understand the market to some to extent.
Okay.
But one of the things that this has taught us and showed us is that leaders have to become different thinkers. Okay.
Okay.
Different thinkers. There was a time when big companies had their own schools,
Mhm.
their own schools. And so if you wanted to get into management at some level, what you did is they sent you away to XYZ Corporation school and some exotic place like Miami Beach or the Outer Banks or wherever
Mhm.
for this week's worth of training. And what you were doing is you were learning the playbook of the company. Okay.
Yeah.
And inside of that, what you ended up doing is something that we have really discovered is not as productive as we thought it was. You're learning how to be uniform. Okay.
Mhm.
You're learning how to sort of all be on the same page. You go back home, you know what the answers to the questions are. It doesn't make any difference really if it fits directly into the question. You can always bend that answer a little bit to make it work within those areas.
I see.
But what we're finding out is in a world that changes quickly.
Mhm.
It's changing. There's some statistics that tell us that the total volume of human knowledge changes, doubles in about 18 hours.
Ah.
And
Mhm.
that's quick. You can just a quick sidebar. You can tell that we have all these volumes, mountains of information by looking at entrepreneurial startups. A lot of stuff in analytics, for example.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's just the idea of trying to figure out what's important in this data.
Yeah.
But so what you have is you have leaders now who are having the same kinds of responsibilities, but the challenges now have changed. And so applying the old playbook to a new set of challenges does not come out with the kinds of solutions that need to happen.
Mhm.
So today, uniformity is not that important. Unity is important.
Mhm.
So it's unity over uniformity. So we're
Interesting.
finding out that something that has always been an earmark of good leaders is they understand the value of their people, their resources. They understand that value. Good leaders today are good listeners.
Mhm.
And if they're not, if they surround themselves with people that are going to agree with them, they're not going to be a leader, period.
So that's a great point. If I can just elaborate that point what you just mentioned, I'm aware of that. IBM used to have a training. I'm going to use IBM because I know their process very well. They used to send people on a training, and so the concept of that you bring a leader from outside and then you run with your playbook. It's like you molding your thinking, their thinking to your company thinking, to your company process, your company strategies. And so they kind of started thinking in terms of your company culture. Where what you say is saying that that no longer is gonna, drive that innovation and drive that the progress on a company. You almost need a people who will think differently, who think out of box, or they can think on their feet to make a decision. That's more important than simply trying to make them think the way your company culture is. So you want that distinctions that, that's what's going to drive companies forward, not the same kind of thinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. That idea of flexibility is no longer flexibility inside of the old envelope, the old model. You have to be flexible outside of that, and that takes some different kinds of characteristics. I'm going to, for example, you can't rely on a view of the marketplace that is developed by research that is not present at the marketplace.
Wow.
Okay.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. You can't say, okay, what we need to put into this market is this. If your sensitivity is not cultural, is not social, is not global, you're going to miss the mark more than once. I can tell you all kinds of stories here, but you have to be able to listen to the voices of the market and trust the voices of the market. And to do that, what you need to be present there. And again, this is just a personal preference. And in my mind, it's not sending somebody to look at the market. It's finding somebody in the market that can give you a valid, candid opinion of what the market looks like. If you live on the 13th floor all the time, or the top floor of the building all the time, and you have yourself a nice little echo chamber where everybody agrees with you and never challenges you, what you're going to get is you're going to get a nice place somewhere in the backyard of your house, because you're not going to be able to stay relevant inside of this world. The interesting part is, the blinding flash of the obvious is here. There's smart people all over the world. It does not make any difference what their houses look like, what their dress looks like, the way that their culinary, their culture doesn't make any difference. There are smart, cognitive people all over the place. And if we cannot, as good leaders, if we cannot get past that issue of diversity, sensitivity, we're headed in the wrong direction completely. And so one of that sensitivity then translates into this basic idea of valuing people. If you began to value the ideas of people in the market, or value the ideas of the people that are on the shop floor, or value the ideas of the people who are in middle management, or value the ideas of the people who are doing the cleanup. If you don't do that, then you're missing part of what you need. You need to be able to build the data set based upon the most relevant information you can get. And that doesn't always come from the experts. That's a part of it. Yes, you have to be able to look at those trends. You have to be able to do that, but you also have to be able to know what your market is like. You have to be able to be a curator of the creative. Okay. You have to be able to build a trusted culture, a culture that is sensitive and listens. Okay. Listening doesn't cost you anything. Okay. It doesn't, but listening makes you better than you imagine it will, because it does so many things. It gives you information, yes, it does, but it gives you a different reputation. It gives you a different access. And it just simply, if you're doing it right, it just simply changes not just what you are, but who you are.
Yeah, yeah. So it does that create a big enough, a big challenge for leaders, JR? First they have to definitely sharpen their skill set. They have to change their mindset. In order for you to listen, you gotta start, looking at your skill set. You gotta change, you gotta have an open mind, or you gotta change some of that, the skill set you had for years that you were running a business for long, and then you gotta take this skill set and teach your emerging leaders in a company as well. Does that create a challenge? You got to sharpen your skill set, then you got to transfer the skill set into your leaders in a company where they can start running a company the same way you want them to run. Does that, the recent disruption, does that create a challenge for leadership that, hey, listen, there's a lot of work you need to do on yourself to change your skill set, but then now you got to teach that stuff?
You're absolutely right. It is a big challenge, but it seems to be more of a challenge to existing legacy leaders that have spent an entire career based upon the model of education that I go to school for the first 12 or 18 years of my life. And I get this whole box full of information, and I just play on that for the next 30 or 40 years till I retire. That's not valid anymore. Some higher education, some universities are learning that, some aren't learning that. The kinds of things that leaders do have to be much more poignant inside of this environment. Now, I find in research that the younger leaders, newer leaders, find it much easier to do that kind of thinking. Not that the legacy leaders can't. There's a lot of legacy leaders that are doing that. There's a number of universities you look at around the world, for example, that understand that and have changed the way that they offer curriculum. They've changed the way that their pedagogy works, and you see that in leaders somewhere, places around, but I see that being more, I want to say, more natural to younger leaders when they come in. You look at some of these young, very, very successful leaders who basically left school, and really relied on experience to teach them. And all of them have these capacities that I'm telling you that they were all sensitive. They were all listening to the market. They all tried to figure out new ways to do what they needed to do. It comes down to that bottom. It's not just what are you prepared to do, but it comes down to that next little point, which is the idea here is that business is not about making money. It's not. Business is about building solutions for people's problems. Now, if you're good at it, or if you find the right place, or you get the right people, or get the right timing, that solution building will be applicable to a lot of different people who have the same problem. And one of the results of that is that you can make money.
The outcome is money.
But you can't start at the other end of that stick. Because if you do, then you go back to what the old model does, and the old model basically always favors finance over market.
This is a great point. I happen to hire a lot of younger people in the company on ongoing basis, and I'm speaking to somebody on my channel as well, David. He teaches character leadership. Olden days where you give instructions to people, hey, I want you to do this, these 10 things, 20 things. I find that the new people coming out of younger people coming out of universities and colleges, they're not very good at taking instructions and running with it. They simply just want us to leave it for them. So, I coach them on an ongoing basis. I find that instead of giving instruction, if I just tell them, hey, these are the few things I just want you to go figure out and get it done, they're much more, comfortable doing that instead of me giving instruction, hey, follow this, follow this. So they want to reinvent the way they want to do things, and then interestingly enough, they get you better result that way instead of following instructions. I think the outcome is much better on a work performance than if you give them instructions, because they find the new ways of doing things.
Gurmeet, I'll tell you a very interesting statistic that was surprising to me,
Yeah.
yet very relevant. And that was studies done on what's important to your employees, what's important to your team, that will make them loyal, make them stay around, make them get involved, make them more productive. And most of the answer is, well, if you pay them well, give them a lot of good benefits, they'll do it.
Yeah.
But the reality, that isn't the outstanding one. Autonomy. Autonomy is the outstanding one. There's a great book that was written, 10, 15, I don't want to show my age, maybe even 20 years ago, by a guy named David Rock. And he wrote a book called Quiet Leadership. And that book was really about the ability of a leader to be able to get their teams to think for themselves. It was all about autonomy and all about teaching them how to do that. As I said, I spent a long time in senior management. I was always plagued by what I called upward delegation.
Yeah.
Okay. One of my people would come in and they would say, I got this problem, and let's make something up. This employee just is unproductive, doesn't pay attention, is argumentative all the time. So what am I going to do? And so you begin to ask questions. Give me some ideas of how you're thinking here. What are you thinking now? And then, what if you had to answer that question? And what if you were here sitting in my chair? What would your thinking be about it? 9.5 times out of 10, the employee already had the answer to the question.
So true. Very true.
They always had it.
Yeah.
And by taking that and by moving that to then, then I think you've defined what your next step is.
Yeah.
And so this little book is great at giving examples. It even has a little workbook in the back for leaders and it has a lot to do with sort of this basic tenet between being a manager and being a leader. When you're a manager, you need to get things done. You need to get things done. When you're a leader, you need to figure out which things need to get done.
I see.
And so and so it is interesting that autonomy is really an interesting fact for me. And then yes, I think that leaders need to think differently.
Yeah.
And there it's in a sort of built around. I'm gonna go through this and there are always, we talked about that idea of being creative, and inclusive. There's also that the leaders have to always be driven toward delivery. I'll tell you the story of Toys R Us, who a long time ago had two basic models. At Toys R Us, they sell toys.
Yeah.
And had two different models. One was sort of the neighborhood store that was in a shopping mall someplace, and one was the flagship stores that were in big cities, and they had all kinds of fancy stuff. And there came a time that they decided that their profits were beginning to fail a little bit, so they had to decide what they were going to do. Well, that sort of began a long, expensive dialogue at the board level that went on and on and on. Some people, wanted the flagship, some wanted the smaller ones. It went back and forth until they finally made a decision. And by the time they made a decision, they didn't have enough money to implement the plan. Okay, and so you need the leaders need to be driven to deliver, and that means they can't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah. Adding more time to a decision doesn't serve. So I seen that very often, JR, that a lot of leaders add time to the decision, right? But this day and age, adding time, it's also no decision, right? No decision is a decision if you don't make a decision, right? So yeah, just by you add time to a decision doesn't mean that you solve the problem. You still haven't made a decision, which is no decision is also decision.
Isn't that the truth? This idea of being able to manage your time.
Yeah.
Being able to manage your time. Say, okay, let's look at this. I get the best information I can. We've got to do something by this date, because that it can be arbitrary. It can be real, but we got to make this decision, and we're going to make it the best way we can, because we've also built a trusted environment, and are a trusted citizen of that culture. Okay. So we make a mistake, we'll make the best. My mother-in-law used to tell her daughter, who is now my wife, we're newly married. We've only been married 54 years.
Wow, beautiful.
And she used to tell her, don't be afraid to make a mistake. If you're going to make a mistake, make it the best mistake you can.
Yeah.
Okay? And leaders need to kind of learn that these days too, because if you have spent some time thinking about your team, thinking about your culture, thinking about your market, and sort of use this academic idea of inclusive capitalism. This idea of that if I can spend money on my market before I put product into it, my returns are going to be less volatile and probably more long-lasting and beneficial. If we're going to put money into a market, we're going to do it before we even put product in there.
Well, look at software industry is a perfect example of that. How many iPhones and software comes in before even got all the bug fixes and all that stuff, right? And they fix those things afterwards, but the product ships in a market way before it's perfect product out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I can't. We're here on this Zoom technology thing, and I can't tell you how many updates I get on Zoom.
It's a perfect example of that. What you just said, that ship the product and do the bug fixing later on. We will perfect that. And compared to olden days, we used to just make sure the product is perfect before we ship it out. The different mindset.
Yep, exactly. So one of those qualities for leaders is to be able to build their own values. Okay. As I said before, part of this is who you are, not what you are. And so you've got to decide what your personal priorities are. And I'm an old guy, so I have these ways, these ideas that I have discovered are more relevant than I ever thought they would be. For example, everybody needs to take time to themselves. They need to be introspective. They need to be thinking about themselves. You can call it what you want. You can call it introspection. You can call it meditation. You can call it prayer. You can call it whatever you want to. But good leaders have to set aside time where they can be introspective. They can think about themselves. They can think about what things are important to them and what things aren't. All right. So when you do that, you set up this idea of taking knowledge and beginning to understand it. Okay. And when you understand knowledge, that you can begin to apply it wisely. You become wise when you do that. And that is part of the habits that you build through the way that you understand yourself. Okay.
I think that is so true. What you just mentioned, JR, is internalizing the knowledge is very, very critical. When I started building a company, I was getting, I had so many obstacles. As you know, when you're building a company, you have so many challenges. But what I learned during that process was the solution to most of those problems were not out there, were not external, was internal to me. I already had a knowledge about it, already had a information about it. I just, the way I look at it was a little bit different. So more time I spent looking at money different from different angles for the same problem, I was able to find a solution within me that instead of going out and trying to find a solution. I think that discovery of yourself and self-awareness and trying to figure out how to solve those problems is a very important, especially with what we've gone through the last couple of years. I think time spent on yourself and trying to internalize some of those issues that you're dealing outside, it give you a lot more opportunities, a lot more ahead in a game than you trying to externalize and trying to solve a problem from market data and all those other issues.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The idea of these values, leaders have to construct values that become sort of emblematic of good choices.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of that is, and I talked about trusted citizens already. You have to be able to trust yourself.
Most important. Yeah.
I call it, probably from the outside, I call it building good character. And it doesn't make any difference which one of the identities that, we all have different identities. We have all kinds of subordinate identities, but most of us have only one superordinate identity that sort of drives everything else. Those priorities, those things that we think are really important. And excuse me. And then being a trusted citizen means that you trust yourself to do the right thing. If you come across situations that aren't part of that priority, you have to trust yourself that I have to make the right decision inside of that. And what that ends up being integrity, honesty. And that's a critical piece of really all good leaders, good transitional leaders, is that they're part of the problem and they're part of the solution.
Yeah, I think that's the tricky part. So basic that, building character and all that stuff, but so important for leaderships. I think it becomes more important, even those, we teach kids to build those personality trait characters, be honest and, work ethics and all that stuff. But so many, take a look at many different levels is a lot more important when you become when it comes to leadership teams, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's a pyramid. A lot of that has to do with what you learned when you were young. Now, I'm not saying that you can't overcome any of this stuff. That isn't, but what you learned when you're young, habits that you developed growing up, what you've learned in your career, there's a lot of character that you bring with you into this role. Okay. But if you don't, that doesn't mean that you can't build it, because remember, leaders, as we said earlier, I think leaders are always renewing. They always have to be changing. That big box full of stuff that we learned in school is not as relevant to us as we go on. And that's not just leaders, that's the workforce, it's individuals. You always have to be listening. You always have to be sensitive. You always have to be learning. You always have to be unlearning.
It changes. The world around us changing so fast that we got to keep up with that stuff, right? So it's event changes, business changes, product, services, everything changes. So you gotta change as you go through it. So let's talk about yourself, Ajay. So talk about your journey. What got you so interested in leadership and helping out in a global market? What got you so interested in doing some work in this area?
Well, I go back to what the discussion that we just had. Part of my world has always been community. I grew up in a state of the United States called South Dakota.
Okay.
South Dakota is very, very rural. It is an upper plains state. So I grew up there. communities were small, communities were far apart. And so you made the best you could out of what you had.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always tell people that when I was growing up, we had running water in the house, but that was me because I went down to the pump and filled up the pails to bring it back up to the house.
Nice. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up, and I'm not unique. This happened to a lot of people, a lot of cultures around the world. I grew up without running water, without indoor plumbing, without electricity,
Mm-hmm.
and to tell you the honest truth, that was my world. I didn't think that. I didn't believe that there was any different way of doing
Mm-hmm.
it. I was lucky because I was in a community that was mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
and so that community was social, was cultural, was theological,
Mm-hmm.
and, and I then um, I went to undergraduate school, small little school in South Dakota,
Mm-hmm.
Northern State University. There, maybe I can get some points with my old alma mater.
Okay.
But all of that, I went originally into teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and part of that was that my priorities, my character that I was building, that
Mm-hmm.
people are important. And
Okay.
so I took that piece basically and went with it. I had the opportunity to do things where I could have made a lot more money in my life,
Mm-hmm.
but but I always felt more satisfied by helping people figure out what they wanted to do, by helping
Mm-hmm.
people fix something. Then I went on to teach for a while. Then I went back to school and got another degree. Worked for a university. Was in small business. Ran a small business for a long time. Then I was wooed to Ohio to it's over 3 decades ago
Okay.
to run a social impact organization
Okay.
because I had been doing a social impact. In the U.S. we call them nonprofits or charitable organizations.
Yep.
The world calls them social impact.
Okay.
But my particular bent was financing, social
Okay.
impact financing. So I came to Ohio and did that for 3 decades. And when I was doing that, I began to understand and began to hone some of those things that I learned and some of those things that I had not learned
Mm-hmm.
as a leader. I was fortunate to have the opportunity as I get an MBA in that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the at the very first wave of MBAs online, very
Wow.
first wave,
Mm-hmm.
and then I spent some time in study at Harvard, where I learned all about the performance and all about the data, data gathering and the information gathering.
Mm-hmm.
A very good experience that I had. And then a number of years later, I got the opportunity to listen to some unpublished works of faculty at University of Oxford in
Okay.
England. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, decided to get into their advanced management and leadership program, spent time there,
Mm-hmm.
became an alum. Then I worked with them for a while as sort of um, an alumni liaison,
Okay.
and made a lot of good relationships there. Also discovered that they had a publishing company,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and when I about the time that I was going to Oxford, one of the reasons that I went to Oxford was also to try and figure out what the best plan was for um, uh, moving my organization, moving my corporation into new leadership.
I see.
that whole plan. How do you do that? So I basically worked on that plan for 10 years. So in 2015, I started my own company, and basically what we do is do consulting and actually do a lot of educating.
Mm-hmm.
A cohort of mine from my class was 2014.
Mm-hmm.
The cohort of mine, his name is Mahesh Yoshi. He's an Indian expat who is in Houston. We cooperated together on a program that he has, a radio program that he has on Voice America called Global Business with Mahesh Joshi.
Okay.
And I was on there a number of times, and I was a producer a number of times in that. And in a casual conversation at one time with a producer from Voice America, she was saying, there's a lot of value in some of this stuff here. It's too bad just to not do anything else with it. So we decided what we're going to do is we're going to put it into books.
I see.
And so we went through a process at Oxford University Press. I gave them this idea, and they liked the idea, and so we launched our first book in a series of 4 on global business. First one was published in 18. We're now on the third book, and that's to come out in July of this year.
Okay.
And knock on wood, we've got a 4th book that we're hoping to start somewhere at the beginning of this next year. But what I have done basically over all that time is I've continued to sort of wander around aimlessly and listen, learn, unlearn, relearn, and try and be as relevant as I can in all of our situations. Now, the group that I worked with in Ohio is still in existence. Went through that transition period, and it worked real well. The young lady who now is in that CEO position had basically taken it to where I could not do it. I'm of a certain genre. I'm of a certain sort of thinking patterns, and I knew at that one point we were at a size that we had to really get innovative to move forward, and so moving it to her was just really great. They're $1 billion in asset or more, and so
Interesting.
and so what I then began to do is began to try and figure out how I can change the way people think. And so I began the same process, Gurmeet, as you have, trying to hear how leaders are thinking, and then trying to get that in front of other leaders. Because in reality, we all learn from ourselves.
That is the best way to learn, listening and every discussion I have with somebody like yourself, JR, or every interview I go through, I take away from that discussion more than anybody else will, right? So it's so much learning. I didn't realize when I started the process, but there's so much learning. Definitely every conversation I had with somebody, especially with our conversation, I learned so much from you. Definitely. It opens your mind, in different ways of looking at things. This is how we learn as a leaders. We learn from each other, right? So,
right. My father said this a long time ago. I don't know if he originated the phrase. I probably never did, but he said, "Remember that none of us are smarter than all of us, and none of us are better than any of us."
Interesting.
So listen.
Yeah, good stuff. Hey, so before we go, where can people find those books? That you mentioned 3 books already published. I see one on Amazon. So they go to your website to find those books, or to Amazon?
They can find out how to get them on the website, which is basically jrglobal.co.
Okay.
But it comes out of Oxford University Press, and their tagline is available wherever books are sold.
I see.
And so, you go to your local library, you go to your local Barnes and Noble or bookstore or whatever, and it may not be on the shelf, but you asked for it.
Good.
Right there, I probably one of the best places I send people all the time to Amazon, because it's just the one that everybody uses. And you'll see all three of them there. And they're all titled Global Business. So if you put in Global Business and J.R. Klein,
Mm-hmm.
you should find them all. And one of them you can pre-order because that hasn't come out yet. But
Yeah, I'm going to include a link below the videos to all those books as well, or your website as well. People can click a button and just access those books at your website.
And on the website, you can also do a number of things. I do some recommendations of books. When I'm going to actually do a link out to your podcast.
Thank you.
We can do that. Also, all of the pods and all of the thinking and blogs that I've done over the years are in a library.
Yeah.
For people to get at it. The new stuff is there too. And I'm also, part of it, part of being a good leader is being an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I've actually done some leading some discussions in this at the Side Business School in Oxford about leaders as artists. And basically artists think a little different.
Yeah.
They think asymmetrically, not
Mm-hmm.
symmetrically. And so if anybody is interested in looking at some of my art, they can go, it's poetslips.com, and you can get that off the website.
So definitely, I will include a link as well. So it's poetslips.com?
Yeah, it's Poets Lips or Poet Slips, which either one.
Yeah, I'll include the link to that as well. Very interesting. Hey, I learned so much from our discussion. Definitely business leaders who are watching us, who are listening to us. I will definitely encourage them to, reach out to you. Have a discussion. Who knows where the discussion will take us, but
Absolutely.
I think I would encourage them. Hey, I learned so much. Reach out to JR. Connect with you, and have a conversation. Who knows what problem could we solve together? That's how we work, and that's how we grow as leaders. Any message you want to share before we go leave for business leaders who definitely they gotta take care of themselves, they gotta take care of the people, and at the same time they gotta scale up the companies because they gotta grow the companies again after this disruption. They got a lot of work cut out for them. Any word of wisdom you want to leave for them?
Okay, here it comes. This is not original to me, but I use it all the time.
Okay.
Always make your word good. If you say it, do it.
Yeah.
Never make assumptions until you have all the information you can get.
Interesting.
Third, never take anything personally. That's the hardest easy thing that you'll ever do.
Yeah.
And the fourth one is just do your best. Do the best you can. You always learn, you always unlearn, you're always relearning. So just do the best you can. And then I will also say, Gurmeet, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. It's been a delightful conversation. I am very encouraged by your initiative to begin these kinds of dialogues. And this is exactly what we need as a community. And so I encourage you, and I thank you. I'm honored to have been here.
Yeah, no, I've been so grateful with the time, you spending more time with me that we talk about it, but, I learned so much. And I think I wish people who are watching will learn, I'm sure that people are watching, they're going to learn so much. There's so much to take away from your, wealth of experience. And, I encourage people to reach out to you, connect with you, and have a conversation and grow together. Thank you so much for time, Jared.
Great.